Okay, so let's begin. Thank you everyone for joining us on this talk today. I'm your host for today. My name is Nazma. I am a fashion lover and I started one of the UK's first blogs dedicated to South Asian fashion in 2007, which is quite some time ago. So I love all things fashion. I have written about fashion, South Asian fashion, particularly from a British Asian perspective. And I'm delighted to be joined today by two founders of an ethical, sustainable fashion brand and social enterprise. So we have Shamima and Alicya from Electric Bazaar. Do you guys want to give a wave and give a quick intro to yourselves?
Hi, I'm Alicya. I'm a student at the University of Manchester and I set up Electric Bazaar with Shamima 3 years ago. So yeah, hi guys.
Hi, I'm Shamima. I work for a homeless charity called Emmaus, and I graduated from university about 2 years ago.
Yeah, we're also joined by Sabriyah Saeed. She is the former Vice President of the Debating Society at Oxford University, and she's written a lot about South Asian issues, contemporary and historical. After this talk, you should definitely check out her debate on the partition of India debate, which is you'll find on YouTube, which is really awesome. So do you want to give yourself a quick intro and say hi?
Hi guys, I'm Sabriyah. Thanks, Nazma. Like Nazma said, I'm a graduate from Oxford and I was the former vice president of the debating society there. And yeah, I've written about South Asian issues and for like student paper, like period poverty and also the partition of India. But yeah, that's me.
And I'll also do a quick intro to Rahima, who is our tech support today, supporting us from Manchester Museum. So thanks, Rahima. So let's begin. So first of all, I'll tell you how this is all going to work. So we have an expert panel of speakers. They're going to explain a little bit about cultural appropriation. We've got some discussion points to talk about. And then we welcome questions in the chat box for now. So we're going to mute everyone and we welcome questions in the chat box. And then later on, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions or give comments via speaking a bit later on. So for now, let us begin. So first of all, speakers, why is this an important discussion that we should be having right now? I'm gonna hand over to Sabriyah.
Okay. I'll just start off by saying that I think partially because I think it's one of the main questions that the diaspora is asking at the moment. And we're seeing so much globalization and cultural sharing or cultural like cross maneuvering. So I think it's just a natural question, like how much can we share and how do we set boundaries over, what is being taken inappropriately and what isn't. And I think that they're really difficult questions which we haven't got solid answers to. So I think that's one aspect of it, but I'll hand over to Shamima and Alicya.
So why is it important to you, Shamima and Alicya, as founders of a fashion brand, that this conversation is happening right now?
I think
Go ahead, Shamima.
yeah. I think there's so much focus on in terms of the consumer and the profits and the profit margins, but I think in terms of the actual people behind the clothes, there's not much focus behind them. And I think especially those that are from South Asian cultures, when we go back home and we see those people, and some of them are our relatives, in terms of doing those handicraft skills, spending so much time and like looking at the fabrics and where they're coming from, and then kind of looking at the way they've been sold and they've been incorporated and the way they've been appropriated, and that recognition not being there, it kind of belittles our culture and also all those people behind those clothings as well. And that's what kind of we're about. We make sure that we give that recognition into all of our clothing pieces, and when that's not there, it's kind of belittling those people that have spent so much time kind of creating those pieces and those skills, that if we do not give that recognition over time, they are just going to be not there anymore, and it's not going to be, it's not going to be South Asian anymore. It's going to the recognition that those people deserve it's just going to kind of fade out. So yeah, I think that's why it's important. It's generally important for the people creating the pieces and the handicrafts and those people working hours and hours that would deserve the recognition. And I think it's important for those people, yeah.
Okay, so let's get over to what actually is cultural appropriation. What does it mean?
I think cultural appropriation is about picking what is seen as cool and trendy from a culture and not recognizing the heritage and maybe the significance of certain things within that culture, and also not recognizing, like Shamima said, the people who made the pieces. For example, in a lot of in the fashion industry, I think it's important to have this discussion because we need to promote what is an ethical practice in fashion, and if you're labeling something as not what it is, that can cause confusion and it can cause a lot of hurt to certain communities. So I think that's what I would define it as.
Okay, so then on the flip side, what's cultural appreciation?
I guess it's then striving to understand those beliefs and those traditions of that culture. And I was actually just reading earlier, and it's really interesting. I was looking at interviews of designers, and a lot of the time there is this whole, you know, I went on holiday and I was really inspired by, let's say they went to India, these vibrant colours that are seen as exotic, and then brought back and then kind of incorporated into the clothing pieces. But to be inspired and kind of releasing a collection based on that, it's not culturally appreciating. I think what is appreciating is then going out your way and really understanding those beliefs, those traditions, the culture, and even the religious symbolic value behind each of those, the jewelry pieces, and where those kind of, because even when you think about the handicraft skills, sometimes it's not just about it's come from a particular region. There's migration, there's movement of people, and there's changes in culture, changes of handicraft skills. And I think understanding all of this and kind of giving that recognition to those processes and to those communities and representing them, I think that's what cultural appreciation is.
So can something be both? Because I feel like there is a really grey fine line between appropriation and appreciation.
I feel like that's quite a difficult question that even like, I'm sure Alicya and Shamima agree that, you know, even we struggle to find what's the right boundary. But I think you can definitely, you know, show, like Shamima said, the main thing I think is the bottom line, where you have these people in South Asia or Pakistan or India or wherever it is who have these handicrafts or traditions which are centuries old and are so key to their identities and also their livelihoods, and just actually showing that at least an economic recognition of those people by, instead of say endorsing maybe Topshop's practices of you know, copying some Balochi design and then passing it off as like tribal or like indie or whatever, instead going to the source and finding a brand like Electric Bazaar and being like, okay, these are handcrafted by you know, people themselves, and this is economically progressing them and feeding back into this community and keeping this identity alive. I think it's more about recognizing that survival is a key component of cultural appreciation, and ensuring that these traditions and identities survive and are not drowned out by globalization, mass corporate benefit. So I'd say that's one of the main things. But in terms of like where the fine line is, I think it's quite difficult, and it's that's, you know, it's a difficult boundary. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because personally, sometimes if designers who did go to India, for example, and they show that they've been inspired, in the collection you can visibly see that it's not just, they've really added it to their own. And I've got some examples. Someone's asked in the comments about examples of cultural appreciation. So when you said a designer going somewhere and being inspired, I would consider that to be a form of appreciation, which is why the question, can something be a bit of both?
I think it's good to be inspired by something, but also wanting to give back to those communities that you've been inspired from. So if you're inspired by India and the aesthetic there, why not get the makers and the artisans involved in that process. You just need to represent and recognize members from that community within, for example, your collection, whether that be from the making stages and also to the runway when you're representing them on models. You know, which backgrounds are you using for the models? Because I think a lot of the examples we're going to look at that you will be sharing on the screen, you know, you can see that a lot of them are using majority Caucasian models, and that can be seen as a problem then when you're not actually making the link between the two of, okay, you're taking from this culture, but who are you giving the platform to then? So I think that's where the line gets a bit blurry.
Yeah, that brings me on to another aspect of this. Who is making the money from a very cynical business perspective? Who is profiting from this culture? And actually, I'm going to hand over to Electric Bazaar, because with your social enterprise, you go out of your way to ensure that the people who are making these things are paid. Paid is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Like, you know, they are appreciated with a monetary value.
Yeah, I think before we go to that point, I just have something to raise that I was reading earlier again, and I think a lot of it is to do with power, and it is dominant cultures appropriating over disadvantaged minority cultures. And I was reading in terms of assimilation, just taking Britain as an example, when you've got migrants coming in, and you're made to assimilate, and you're discriminated against indirectly or directly if you're wearing cultural clothing. But then those same clothing pieces that you're told to kind of hide away in public, those are the clothing pieces that are then taken and then sold off to profit from. So in terms of who's profiting, I think a lot of it is to do with sometimes power, in the sense of kind of picking and choosing of how they want these minority groups to be placed. Okay, we like this culture, we can sell it off, but then when it's in the kind of norm, they don't want it to be the norm, in terms of that assimilation kind of needs to be there. So yeah, I think there is a lot of kind of power and the dominant cultures over the minority cultures in terms of who's profiting, for sure.
Yeah, so we've had a question in the comments. How do we make sure that these individuals, that we give back to these communities, and how do us as consumers ensure that we're doing the right thing?
I think that's a really great point, and I was actually having this discussion with Sabriyah earlier, that is that kind of responsibility on us as consumers to kind of put the pressure on big brands, because big brands are always going to see it from a very economic point of view. You know, what's going to make the most money and the most profit for them. And I don't think, unless us as consumers we're demanding that information, you know, there's a whole campaign called Who Made My Clothes, which is done by an organization called the Fashion Revolution. And it's really about holding brands accountable as consumers, as the people that are buying from these brands, and essentially making them as rich as they are, for us to question where does that come from. And maybe when there's that accountability process in place, then brands will be more transparent, showcase the people that are working on their designs. Why is it so hidden away? That's the question we need to ask. There's obviously unethical practices going on if it is being hidden and we're not being shown, because these processes are really, really beautiful to even see in action. You know, we have like videos of artisans doing the block printing, doing the sewing stages, and it's an amazing process to see as a consumer how your clothes are made. And I think with these big brands we just see the end result, and we need to question why aren't we seeing the before stages, because that's where what I think is the really interesting part of it. So yeah.
Yeah, we've just had another comment from Sabriyah, and she said, cultural appropriation comes under the umbrella of capitalism, which at its core is power-based. So, yeah, it comes down to it. So tell us a little bit more about Electric Bazaar then, and how you actively, so if I was going to buy something from your brand, how do I ensure that people are being recognised, the people who made it are being recognised?
So we work with women primarily from low income communities, so we ensure that they are able to work from home in kind of a safe environment that they're comfortable in, because a lot of the time in specific regions and classes in South Asia, it's not appropriate or seen as good for a woman to go out to work. So this kind of gives them that financial independence within the home and within an environment they're comfortable within. And also paying them fair wages, that's the main thing, giving them that good working environment, giving them some sort of involvement in the design process we found has been really beneficial to both us and them, because they love getting involved in that, and also we benefit from getting their expertise and their style elements into the clothing. So I think that's how we ensure it, and we kind of want to be transparent to our customer base as well, and we kind of want to create this community rather than like see you as customers. We see everyone as part of this community towards like promoting slow fashion and ethical practices. And yeah, so showing the behind the scenes, I think that's really important. Sharing our story of how we started, sharing our practices with other people who want to start up businesses. So I think it's really like, it's a lot of different things that you have to take into account, not just, you know, down to who's making it, but also how you treat the people that are your customer base who are interested in business and entrepreneurship as well.
And I think also another point I wanted to raise was, I think even South Asian brands in itself can do more as well, because you get loads of boutiques and loads of people selling, but then kind of how many of them actually do what we do, in the sense of talk about those people behind the clothes and where the origins of those prints and those fabrics and those handicraft skills are. And I think one, if we all did that, all South Asian brands, it just gives such a good united front. And also those that aren't individuals that are non-South Asian, wanting to incorporate and wanting to appreciate our clothing pieces and our fabrics and our handicraft skills into their designs, they'll have and be able to use us as an example. So if they not knowing how to kind of appreciate, kind of they go into our website and looking at how we're doing it, use our example, and they'll be able to do it as well. So I think South Asian brands could probably do more as well in terms of making sure that we're appreciating and we're kind of researching, because sometimes, you know, like looking at the different regions as to where these handicraft skills come from, it's not just about online of it's come from this area. Again, migration and movement on people, there's so much to look into, and maybe someone who's not South Asian wanting to incorporate that into the clothing piece may find that difficult in terms of researching, but if we're able to provide that and make that information more accessible as a South Asian brand, I think that's something that we could probably do more of and move towards.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know how you got started, because from people I've spoken to who work in textiles and who studied at university, for example, a lot of the curriculum in, I guess, in arts degrees, I've not done one myself, but from what they've said, it's a westernized kind of point of view on things. So how did you get started from the perspective of what you wanted to do and going about finding the suppliers and making sure that you were giving respect to what you're putting out there?
So I think both me and Shamima did kind of social sciences / art degrees. So although like a lot of them do give quite a Western perspective, I was quite lucky in the sense that in my degree we had like a whole module on kind of colonial geographies. I did geography, by the way, and we had this whole module on like colonialism and how that links to kind of nowadays and things like that. So I was very aware of these things through my studies, as well as just being like a South Asian woman in Britain, and always having that kind of link to back home, because my mum's from Pakistan and I used to go every year. And you know, me and Shamima both had been in the habit of kind of getting our own clothes made when we went back to Pakistan and India, and designing our own pieces. So it was quite a natural progression, because a lot of people at university started to notice and like what we wore. So then we thought, why not just give kind of a first collection a go? And you know, the response after that has been really good, and it really started very, very small. So it wasn't kind of, you know, this whole we sourced from like local bazaars, not even like big suppliers or anything, or wholesalers. It was all sourced locally, and that's kind of where the idea of kind of helping these low-income communities came from. Like, why go to the big suppliers that are probably already getting quite a lot of business? Why not go to the small shops and the bazaars that don't get as much business? And why not go for tailors who work from home, like the women that don't get as much exposure? So that's kind of where it came from, is starting small. We thought, let's keep it this way and just kind of expand our collections as is natural and as can be done by us, because we were both studying at the time. So it's gone slowly, but it's at a pace that we know we can control and keep everything how that aligns with our vision. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in terms of the platform in itself, it's not just we're a fashion brand. Obviously, we really do try and campaign for ethical fashion through everything we do in terms of kind of how we promote our clothing pieces and talking about the artisans behind the scenes. But also, we do loads of other things, example, domestic violence campaigns. And again, we really do try and focus it in South Asian countries. And we do lots of other things that we've really built this community, like Alicia said, of talking about different topics, interviews, example like period poverty in South Asian countries. So yeah.
Yeah, so we've just had another from Michelle, who's interested in ideas around calling out those designers and brands who appropriate traditional South Asian designs without giving them recognition. So what's the best way? How would you go about, you know, calling a brand out? Would you cancel culture on Twitter, which seems to happen a lot? But what is the best response that you would advise in terms of how would you deal with that?
I'll just jump in, but I feel like cancel culture can be quite an extreme way of going about holding people accountable. I think a more productive way in terms of engaging the other side is actually just having a conversation. I think if enough people sort of hold a mirror up to these companies and tell them, look, what you're doing is insensitive, or you could be doing this better, we're not going to cancel you, but we want to see improvements. I think that's actually a more productive way, because as soon as you start cancelling someone, you remove them from a conversation. And really, what is that doing? It's alienating them. And then maybe they think they don't understand why they've gone wrong. Or to be fair, though, there have been a lot of brands, I think, like Gucci and Dolce & Gabbana, who've done the same thing over and over again, where people have called them out repeatedly for accounts of racism or cultural appropriation or whatever it is, and they seem to make the same mistakes. So then it becomes a bit more difficult. And I think one of the most powerful tools that we as consumers have is where we put our money. I think it was Alicia or Shamima said, like, putting our money somewhere else instead of, you know, buying into these brands, and that's where it really hurts for them. So I think there are more productive ways of, you know, showing where we as consumers stand and what we will tolerate. And just to add on to the previous question, I think something that Electric Bazaar do really well also is showing the diversity through their brand, the diversity of Pakistan and the regions, and how different each sort of region in Pakistan is, and how different the handicrafts are. I think that's something they do to really appreciate, actually, this is not a homogenized nation that the West has one idea of. This is actually a very complex, and, you know, it's full of different communities. And I think what it also does is breaks down sort of ideas that of South Asia, that it's you know, actually a lot more different than people would expect. So I think it's a really good educational way of showing people through clothing and handicrafts what South Asia actually is.
Yeah, so we've had a couple more comments. I'm going to read out two comments, and then I've got another question from the comments. But someone said, I definitely think that cultural appropriation is a manifestation of our consumerist attitudes, because it links both to our colonial histories and fast fashion habits. Someone has also said, those big brands, they don't make mistakes. They have the audacity to continue because their demographic of customers are more often than not the elite. And then the question that we have, this is Tina's asked, does Electric Bazaar have any non-South Asian customers? So if someone from a non-South Asian heritage was to buy your products.
Yeah, we have like a lot of non-South Asian customers. It's a real mix. You would think that it would be majority South Asian, but it's really, really diverse. We have Arab, we have lots of different ethnicities, and also white people as well. Like it's not marketed specifically for anyone. We just want to showcase the amazing traditional designs of Pakistan and India and back home, and actually give recognitions to the craftspeople. If anything, our artisans and our craftspeople want as many people to be wearing their designs as possible. And if we start singling out people of, you know, you can't wear this, you can't wear that, I think it's really hurting the people that are wanting to benefit from this. So if it's not big brands, you know, it's a different conversation when it comes to big brands, but when you're supporting these communities, you know, the more people that wear it, the better for them. So no, I'm just reading the rest of the question. There, the appropriate aspect, I think you can see very clearly where it's made from. The customers kind of educated in the process of buying that product, because even our tags have information about where the product is made, how it is made, and things. So yeah, yeah.
Cool. So I'm gonna move over to some of the visual examples that we've got to share with you. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, so we're going to start off with Alexander McQueen, who in his fall 2008 collection, I think he spent about a month in India, and you can visibly see that from some of these designs. Now, I have a personal story to tell about this particular collection, because I wasn't a huge fan of Alexander McQueen. I didn't know very much about him, and I went to his exhibition after he'd passed away at the Victoria and Albert Museum. When I walked into the room where these outfits were, I really, I hadn't before I'd even read that they were inspired by South Asia. I instinctively just knew. And as a South Asian person, I felt a sense of pride. So for me, this was appreciation. It was this really famous designer with his very own distinct style he's been inspired by India. And you can see that he's added his own touch to these. You will not find clothes like this, to my knowledge, or you couldn't at the time, from an Indian designer. So it is a true fusion and an inspiration. There's a couple more pictures, even from down to like the shoes and the colours that he's put into it. Yeah, what do you guys think?
Actually reading up about this collection, kind of the Vogue cover of it, and what struck me was kind of how they described the inspiration behind it, how they described India, and it was very remnant of like the colonial past and empire, you know, inspired by the best times of the British Raj. And I just thought that's kind of what made me feel a bit uncomfortable about this collection. And like when I was younger, I'd probably see something like this and feel that sense of pride as well, of like, oh wow, they're using, you know, our traditional Asian wear in like a high fashion brand. But then when as I got older and I got to know a bit more about the colonial histories and how that links to kind of fashion, I feel like that kind of description of it as a very vague, kind of whimsical, romantic time of the British Raj is just kind of a bit disrespectful to what, you know, the effects of colonialism for Indian people. And yeah, that's how I feel about this particular collection.
Yeah, we've had a comment. Someone said, if an Asian person designed this, would it have been recognized?
Yeah, exactly. It probably wouldn't have been seen as, you know, groundbreaking or anything, because if you look at Asian designers, particularly Indian designers, they've released much more probably better collections, and they wouldn't get the same recognition. And I think that's something that's worthy to raise for sure.
Yeah, we've also had another really interesting question from Jayashri, asking about is one of the challenges of getting cultural appropriation recognised the fact that it's down to individual perception. So, for example, you could get a fair trade logo or an organic logo. The perception of cultural appropriation, does that make it harder to establish what is and what isn't?
I think definitely it makes it hard to define what cultural appropriation is to each individual. I think I would say it's more about recognition personally of, you know, what's being taken and referred to, whereas another person would see it more simply as this person is wearing a bindi and they're not South Asian. That's cultural appropriation. I'm very offended by that sort of thing. So I think it's very it's definitely a personal thing, and I think it's partly because, especially for the diaspora, there's a sense of ownership that's involved with it. I think perhaps for some of us, there's, you know, a longing to have ownership over our South Asian heritage, and then we see it being taken in ways which we've never been able to claim in a way. So I think that's where the our sort of sensitivity to it comes, and depending on the person or their own personal experiences with their culture, especially being in the UK or the US or the West or wherever it is, I think that's what can change a person's perception of it. So I think it is quite a difficult thing to define. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me move on to the next collection. So this was Chanel's pre-fall 2012 collection. When I read the write-up of this recently, it started off with Karl Lagerfeld never even went to India when he put this collection together. But this was another one. When I blogged about this in 2012, I was really excited. It was my brand affinity for Chanel. I got really excited. I was like, this is what it would look like if Chanel did Indian clothes, and props to them for using, I think there was 3 Indian models in the runway. But at the same time, re-looking back at it, as much as these clothes are very, very beautiful, what you've said about, you know, who would, if this was any other designer, if this was it's all about, it's the brand Chanel that really makes this. And he didn't even visit.
Yeah, I think the designer said it's more inspiring not to go to places. So it's kind of, he's even owning the fact that he's never been, and also owning the fact that he made all these pieces in Paris rather than India. And this is where the cultural appreciation aspect has kind of fallen through, because if you're already wanting to appreciate it, why not get Indian artisans to make these clothings, which are pretty much exact copies of our traditional wear, with kind of, you know, that Chanel high fashion spin. And again, what makes it high fashion is it the fact that Chanel came out with it? If it was another designer, would we be having kind of the same appreciation for the collection? So yeah,
I do still love this collection. I'm going to say that I still love it. We've had a comment. Someone, Poonam, said, could cultural appreciation, so non-South Asians incorporating it into their designs, result in a watering down of our culture?
I definitely think so. I think especially Western brands like Chanel or Alexander McQueen, they have such a huge amount of influence in the West, and South Asian designers naturally really only get exposure to their immediate South Asian markets or the diaspora. Save maybe Sabyasacchi, who did his like collections with H&M, but I think they do, like, when they do things like this and really just kind of give a watered down version of our culture, that's the impression that most people get of our culture in terms of like an aesthetic or a fashion sense. I think especially with Karl Lagerfeld, I understand that there's, you know, high fashion and haute couture is something that's supposed to be like a fantasy, dreamlike, and, you know, a space for imagination. But then, you know, there are also, these clothes are embedded in reality as well. They're not that far removed that they shouldn't be, you know, held to some strings of, you know, what's actually real in this world. And you can have your imagination run wild and still use South Asian designers or like credit what has influenced you. So I think there is definitely, especially when you're trying to represent other cultures, there is that responsibility.
Yeah, you've just made me think. There is one Indian designer that I know of who does show at Paris Couture Week. His name is Manish Arora.
Yeah.
And I heard him speak at an event once, and he was talking about how he he has kind of wacky out there designs, but he uses the traditional artisans to do it.
Yeah.
And he was saying that when he first started his, he calls it a factory, but fancy word is atelier. He was asking them to do skulls, and he's like, and these are very like strict Muslim people that were doing this. He said there was a bit of hesitation for them to do the skulls, but then they did it. And look up Manisha Rora, some of his work is amazing, and he does use artisans.
Yeah, I think there's another perspective as well, like where do you draw the line with creativity then? If you're saying, you know, taking aspects of a culture is watering down that culture, I think we need to leave space to allow people to be creative and take like aspects, and as long as you're recognizing them, reinterpreting them in a way that might be seen as more modern or contemporary, and people would want to wear it in their everyday wear. I think there's nothing wrong with that, because, you know, you're not, especially being in the West, we might not prefer to go out in full traditional clothing every day. We like kind of little aspects of it in our wear that kind of fuses with our Western identity growing up in Britain and wherever in the West you've grown up. So I feel like reinterpreting aspects of cultural designs is not always a bad thing either.
Cool, so I've got some more examples to run through. So this one you put on the Electric Bazaar Instagram. So I've got Lady Gaga here and some of the comments from people. So interesting. So yeah, one person said, aren't we creating a huge boundary by limiting something to only one culture or region?
I guess we had someone come through as well in the direct messages, and they were saying as to sometimes you don't know, as in Lady Gaga could have actually, maybe it doesn't look like in this picture, but other celebrities gone and researched and actually looked into it and was generally really interested in the culture, and they wanted to actually wear it because they were interested and fascinated by the beliefs and the traditions. So yeah, I guess in terms of sometimes kind of putting that label on isn't always fair as well, because there is that kind of ambiguity in terms of knowing if that person had their intention of appreciating and representing something that they really researched on. And that's what I find really hard as well, because some of the pictures, when we're looking through them, as I before, is how do we know what their intention was? So I think that's interesting as well.
Yeah. Also, so this is Beyonce in Him, is it called Him for the Weekend? That song that she was in. This is one of the other examples. It's interesting. We've had another comment that's really interesting, and this came up in a conversation I had offline as well, but surely even in India, traditional clothing, etc., and wearing of bindis has undergone huge changes from traditional significance to fashionable accessories. So designs have changed. So it's changing, things are evolving. And I guess the conversation that I had, I'm not a Hindu person, but in the past I have wore a bindi. And the question came up, well, you're a South Asian person, why are you allowed to wear it as a non-Hindu? Aren't you appropriating it as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question as well. Like what was in the comments on the previous slide is like, where do you draw these geographical boundaries? You know, there's cultural spillover between regions, and for example, as a South Asian, you know, if you're not Hindu, but India was, you know, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh was all one country before, you know, you share these traditions with you basically share the traditions, and you know, it's that kind of thing. Oh, it's okay for a South Asian to wear it, but would it be okay for a white person to wear it? Or it's okay for a person of color to wear it, but would it not be okay? So I think that's a really hard thing to distinguish, because for example, we have clothing that is more inspired by kind of sorry, Afghani regions, because in the north of Pakistan, you know, there's a spillover with Afghanistan, with Balochistan, and spillover with Iran. So they really do mix and mingle. So is it within that geographical region are you allowed to? And if you're not in that region, you're not allowed to. You know, no one would really question a Muslim South Asian wearing an abaya, which is kind of the Arab traditional dress, because, you know, they appear Muslim, and maybe that could, you know. So I think with religion, culture, all these things mesh together, and it can be quite difficult to pinpoint what is right and what's wrong.
And sometimes I think generally certain prints and certain handicraft skills are from one side of the world to the other side of the world are generally similar. So example, we have Kuchi patchworks, which is quite similar to the Palestinian dress wear. And then again, it's kind of like that claiming of, oh, is it Palestinian, is it Kuchi wear, because of, in terms of how it looks. So I think that's interesting as well in terms of fabrics and handicraft skills that are genuinely similar across certain countries.
Yeah, like we've had design, like been Yemeni design, Turkish design, Palestinian. Like we've been kind of compared to a lot of different cultures, but that's genuinely because they look very, very similar.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think
Cool.
also,
So let me quickly go through. I'm just conscious of the time, and I want to give people the opportunity to ask questions vocally as well. This is AZALEA's Bounce music video. In fairness to her, the whole video was set to like a wedding theme, I guess. Kendall Jenner at Coachella. So music festivals particularly have a rep for massive cultural appropriation from not just South Asian fashion, but like feathered headdresses and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's that whole relation to like this like indie boho hippie aesthetic. So like a lot of South Asian wear is incorporated into that. Aspects of Black culture and also Native American culture is just made as this into this one trend, which is like boho and hippie, and that's why it's seen as acceptable for festival wear, which is interesting how that's evolved.
yeah, I think it's also
interesting. Just in the comments, someone said, I think the difference lies in the power dynamic, and these examples are historical cultural exchanges. The same isn't true for British examples of cultural appropriation. I don't know who you are, but I'd love to, if you were willing to speak later, to what would you count as a British example of cultural appropriation? And then we also, someone's commented, why haven't the Kardashians appropriated? Again, I'm going to give you opportunity to elaborate a little bit more because I'm not quite sure what you mean there. So Gwen Stefani, just briefly, in the 90s, this was the one that I could potentially forgive a little bit because she was in a relationship with an Indian person at the time, so she probably did understand the cultural significance of it. I think in an interview she said her boyfriend's mum gave her the bindis, so
yeah, exactly. Especially like because my dad's white and my mum's Pakistani, and I have you know, a lot of family that's white, and you know, when you're inviting people into the culture, you're not going to say no, you can't wear this. And you know, there's a lot of aspects of when they've been given these as gifts, they've been invited into the culture, they've been invited to weddings and celebrations, Eid and things like that, so they will partake in the culture and actually have an understanding of even our friends, you know, that we want to invite and share aspects of our culture. I think everyone wants to share the good parts of your culture, and I think this whole aspect of cherry picking, I think we as members of that culture ourselves do the cherry picking aspect as well, because we always want to showcase the best. So
yeah, so I have another example. This is MARCHESA's Spring 2013 ready-to-wear collection. Some of these dresses I really liked, but other ones I thought an Indian designer or a Pakistani designer could have made that exact same outfit. It's this one on the left that I think is a little bit innovative and different. So it's just interesting that this was a British-American designer that put these out on the runway. And the Vogue write-up for this one, I think, said some of the dresses are innovative, but a lot of them are just like copies, kind of.
Yeah, like some of them head to toe are literally full-on Asian wear, which is sad because they've not been recognised at all as in full-on, not even aspects.
yeah, and again, the write-up is like Bollywood and India, all again homogenizing the country as one whole. Like Sabriyah was saying before, it's a lot of diversity between regions. So just kind of saying, oh, it's Bollywood themed is, I think, reducing the culture to just that as well.
yeah, I think
So the next one, Paul Smith brought these £300 sandals out that anyone who's in South Asia will know that you can buy these for very cheap.
I was saying before, I love how they're called Robert.
It actually stressed me out when I saw it because this is just such a common footwear in in South Asia, and it's actually the Peshawari chappal. So its origins are in Peshawar in North Pakistan, and it's a very Afghani kind of design. So to see this again marketed as Robert sandals, as Shamima said, is just a bit ludicrous, to be honest. At least put what the design is inspired by.
Yeah, it's interesting also with the Peshawari chapel, that, you know, people in Pakistan traveled to Peshawar to buy these chapels from specific vendors. So it's like these guys are making the effort because they know where, you know, the good quality is and who's going to make it properly and who knows the tradition of making it. And this is just like, they don't even look as good, so.
Yeah, this was a screen grab from someone else's website, but I'll be really interested to see where these were made, you know, the made in.
I think they actually got pressure to actually recognize where it came from as well. So they had to change the description and the name of it.
Yeah, so moving on to Appropriation. So this is SABYASACHI, who did a collection with Christian Louboutin. So this is a European designer working with an Indian designer. And you mentioned SABYASACHI before. He's done a collection with H&M. SABYASACHI's worked with loads of different European brands. This was a nice collection.
Yeah.
I think it's, sorry, just to, I think it's really nice actually for these designers, like Louboutin's based in Paris. I think, you know, they actually learn a lot from these craftsmen, just technically as well. So I think one of the things that's, I think designers should realize on a more general note is, you know, this is a whole point of sharing is learning as well. You're going to be learning new crafts, and why wouldn't you want to do that as a designer? So yeah.
And then this is an example from BERSHKA, which is like a high street store. And as I was putting this presentation together, this outfit popped up on my Instagram feed, and I looked at the mirror work, and I thought to myself, wow, how about that for timing, that with this outfit, which mirror work is, you guys can probably tell me a little bit more I don't know what the traditional name is for outfits with mirror work on them, but this is a craft that you would expect to see from South Asia.
Yeah, it's traditionally called like shisha embroidery, so it's normally done by hand, but obviously, as you can see here, there's a lot of reproductions which are more mass made, so the mirrors probably weren't sewn by hand for this one, and they usually use like real actually mirror pieces. But yeah, I remember when Shamima sent me this after you found it, and I was like, it's perfect for what we're talking about, because it is literally a traditional technique that's just been made into, you know, this very Western outfit. And yeah.
So yeah, just to give some examples of how you represent your work and your clothes, because I think it's not just the outfits themselves, it's the context. And I think the context of something, so wearing a bindi to a music festival is out of place, whereas if you're going to a wedding function or an Indian event, then it's perfectly acceptable to wear it. So I think context is important. And I've got a couple of examples of your outfits here, which context-wise, how you've shot them. Do you want to talk a little bit more, explain?
Yeah, so the first image is actually backstage at our first fashion show at the Whitworth Art Gallery, and the designs that they're wearing, the patchwork that you can see is the traditional Afghani type patchwork. The middle is kind of the shisha mirror work that we just spoke about, and this was all hand done by a woman artisan at home. And the right is I got Balochi patchwork on it, and that was actually, the model for that is someone who's based in Lahore in Pakistan. She's like a blogger and an artist that lives there, and we asked if she would shoot the collection for us, and she really kindly took a few pieces to shoot. And again, this is very representative of, you know, like a Pakistani rooftop kind of chilled out vibe. So we kind of try and, you know, even when we shoot our collections, bring that you know, the backgrounds when we shoot in Pakistan, very remnant to kind of where these pieces come from as well.
Yeah, I've got a few more examples for you. Is this your latest collection?
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
the latest that we just read.
And these are our jewelry pieces as well.
Yeah, because the dress in the middle, I could totally see that being worn like by people of any ethnicity, if you know what I mean. It's a dress that has mainstream appeal.
Mm.
So we've had another question. So Nico's asked, can we ever have a definite answer to whether something is cultural appropriation or appreciation? Because what might be cultural appropriation to one member of that culture might be seen as appreciation to somebody else.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there is a definite answer to this question because it differs from person to person. Not every member of that culture is going to have the exact same view on what they deem as appreciation and appropriation. So that's why I think it's such a difficult topic to define what is appropriate and what's not. But yeah, I really don't think you can reach a solid conclusion. But I think that what this discussion should be moving towards is kind of giving recognition to the ones that truly deserve it. And I think when it boils down to that, we can come to a consensus of this is how, you know, they should be recognized and they should be paid for their work. They should be the ones profiting off of the cultural elements that are being added into different wares. And just about brands being ethical more generally, I think if we head the discussion in that direction, then we can come to a more solid agreement.
Cool. So that was all I had for the presentation. We've got around 4 or 5 minutes left. So I'm going to invite people to ask questions verbally if they want to. So if you want to ask a question, there's a little button you can press which says raise hand, I think, or you can wave. I'll try and keep an eye, but if you're also welcome to keep asking questions in the chat as well. So any questions, thoughts, comments, speak now. You have 4 minutes. Yeah, okay, so person who's listed as iPhone, I'm going to unmute you, so you should be able to speak. Hi.
Hiya.
Hello.
Hi guys. Thank you so much. This was all really cool. I enjoyed it. One thing that I wanted to ask and wanted to mention that didn't really come up, I was the person who commented about the power dynamics as well, that you mentioned earlier. But I think the reason why sometimes cultural appropriation is very difficult for a lot of South Asians, also other people of colour, to witness is because often what is our traditional wear, when it is presented on a white model or a white celebrity, it's very much praised, whereas if you see it on a auntie on the street, it's seen as something that's not very palatable. So I think the racial power dynamics when cultural exchange happen is something that is really important and something that is also like really undercurrent when people observe cultural appropriation. So
yeah, I think I definitely agree that there's definitely a double standard, and I think cultural appropriation is not the biggest racial issue in itself. Say, you know, someone again wearing a big nose ring or a bindi or whatever, but it's symptomatic of attitudes towards South Asians or whatever culture it is. So I think that it is important to recognize that, you know, there is a hypocrisy underlying, you know, how these sort of elements of fashion are seen, particularly when, you know, they're mass produced and people are profiting off them, and it's not the people who are actually responsible for, you know, for making them originally.
So we have, I'm going to limit it to there's 2 questions, 2 people who've got their hands raised. So I'm going to unmute you, Michelle, and then I'll come over to you, Sidi. So Michelle, you should be unmuted shortly. Unmute, and then you can ask your question.
Thanks. I suppose just thinking especially about the last 2 contributions, I suppose I'm thinking about misogyny really, and yeah, just trying to clarify what I actually think. But the questions are about how, you know, somebody mentioned there's an auntie figure wearing something that would be kind of criticised or not praised versus a model. So you've got ageism in there perhaps as well as, you know, women being criticised and scrutinised for what we wear, and less attention goes to the people who profit financially, who might be men as well as women. So it's just something about the scrutiny women are being subjected to. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Michelle. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? I agree with you. I think ageism, and there's so many different aspects of this.
Yeah, definitely. I think even like body type, like when you see it on a model, tall, skinny, you can you know, that look, like as the contributor said, that you know, it looks more palatable, it looks better, and that's what makes it seen as high fashion. But if it is on an older auntie figure, for example, or even someone who, you know, like we've noticed that, you know, we try and use a lot of modest models in our collections because we do design modest wear, and you know, we feel like that the same thing being done on Caucasian models, for example, is praised a bit more, or is seen as more high fashion and groundbreaking. And when it is on traditional women, it's not, because, oh, that's what they always wear, kind of thing. So I think
love to hear what everyone wants to talk about and include those conversations as articles in the issues.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you, Siddhi, because we need more people like you basically in the fashion industry, because that's the problem. These brands have no one like you to consult with. That's why they're making these major blunders and errors, because they don't actually involve people from those cultures or those backgrounds, or even have any sort of diversity in the, you know, the boardrooms, as you might say. So I think like that is definitely important, and really want to support your magazine to definitely get in touch with those details for sure.
Yes, that's the one. I wanted to request to you. The thing is, I was working all day and I couldn't join the session earlier. Is it possible for you to share a recording or something? Because I joined in, I think, 30 minutes after the session started. And I think I joined in when you were showing the Chanel screen. And I couldn't listen or hear anything that you all discussed before that. Is it possible for you to share that by any chance?
Yeah, so we are recording this session and we're planning to put it on YouTube. So
perfect.
From the start.
Great.
So on that note, I'm just going to share my screen again one more time. And this is just our contact details basically. So if you want to get in touch with Electric Bazaar, this is their website. This is my website. I don't write about fashion, unfortunately, but if you're posting, you can give me a follow. And
yes, definitely.
Socials as well. So that's how you can get in touch with us all.
Great. Thank you, guys.
So thank you all for joining us today. And as I said, we'll be putting this on YouTube, fingers crossed. Watch back. And if you want to get in touch with Shamima, Alicya, myself, or Sabriyah, I've just given contact details. So thank you.